Reed was 60 years old, sitting across from his son at the kitchen table, trying to explain something about land and ownership and the kind of man you have to be to deserve what you claim is yours, when he stopped talking in the middle of a sentence. He stopped because something had finally arrived. Not a memory. He had the memory. He had carried the memory for 20 years, with the same care a man carries a piece of writing he cannot yet read, but knows is important. What arrived at that kitchen table on an ordinary afternoon with the coffee going cold between them was the meaning. One sentence from a stranger in a desert canyon. 20 years of a man's life quietly shaped by words he had not yet fully understood. And then, in the middle of trying to teach his son something about character, the lesson he had been carrying finally landed. This is that story. And the reason it stayed with Reed for 20 years, the reason it chose a Tuesday afternoon in his own kitchen to finally open up, is the reason it is worth telling now. Reed had been driving cattle through Apache territory for most of his working life, long enough that the routes were settled in him like geography rather than memory. He knew which canyons could be trusted in wet season and which ones turned treacherous. He knew the water sources and the places where the rock changed and the ground became unreliable. He had made a particular crossing through a narrow canyon in New Mexico territory many times before. On the crossing that matters to this story, he made it through safely. His cattle made it through. His two hands made it through. But somewhere in the tight, winding passage between the canyon walls, in the hours of focus it took to keep the herd moving and the horses calm in close quarters, Reed's saddlebag came loose and fell. He did not discover it was gone until they were clear of the canyon and 3 miles into open country. He went back. He spent the better part of an afternoon searching the canyon floor and the ledges above it, working methodically, going over every foot of ground he could access. The bag was not there. What was in that bag was not easily replaced. His savings, pulled out of a bank in silver coin because he had never trusted banks the way other men did. The land deed to a parcel in the Northern Territory that he had spent 3 years saving toward. And a photograph. A single daguerreotype of his wife and his 2 children, taken the spring before he left on that drive. The only image of them he had. He rode on. He did not have another choice, and he was not the kind of man who fell apart in the field. But he rode on, carrying the weight of that loss in a way that sat differently from ordinary loss. The money could be rebuilt. The deed could be reissued with enough paperwork and enough time. But the photograph was gone. Not your land deed, not your photograph. Those things can be lost and recovered, or lost permanently. And the loss is real, but it is not the deepest loss. What the man was talking about was character, the specific, accumulated, daily practiced thing that a man builds or fails to build across a lifetime of choices. What you truly are stays with you, regardless of what happens to everything else. You can lose your savings, and you can lose your deed, and you can lose the photograph, and you still have what you are. And what you are is also the only thing you can genuinely give away, the only thing you can genuinely destroy through the choices you make when the choices are hard. The man in the canyon had not returned Reed's saddlebag because of an abstract tradition or a spiritual concept about preservation. He had returned it because returning it was what he was. Because to keep it would have been a departure from himself that no amount of silver coin was worth making. He was explaining himself to Reed in the only language that carried what he meant. Reed sat at the table and looked at his son, and finished what he had started to say. He told the whole story, beginning to end. The canyon, the saddlebag, the trading post, the one sentence, the 20 years. His son listened. When Reed was done, his son asked what he thought they should do about the land dispute. Reed told him that the corner of land was not the question. The question was what kind of man his son intended to be when the whole thing was settled, and whether the answer to that question was going to be worth whatever the land was worth. His son sat with that for a while. The dispute was settled without legal proceedings. The neighbor's claim was ultimately found to be the weaker one, but Reed's son had already decided, before the resolution, how he was going to handle it, regardless of which way it went. He had decided what he was, and he had decided to be that thing clearly enough that no ambiguous deed language was going to change it. The canyon remembers everything that passes through it. That sentence is about more than rock and water and the quiet preservation of the things we carry. It is about the fact that every choice leaves a record somewhere. Not always in a courthouse, not always in a deed, but in the accumulated shape of who you are, the version of yourself that gets built one decision at a time, and that goes with you everywhere you go, regardless of what you are carrying in your hands. What belongs to you stays yours. Reed was 60 years old when he finally understood that. His son was 32 when he heard it for the first time. Both of them carried it afterward. The same sentence passed from a stranger in a canyon to a cattle driver at a trading post counter, and then from a father to a son at a kitchen table, crossing 20 years and 2 generations without losing a word. That is what endures, not the silver coin, not the deed, not even the photograph, though Reed kept it to the end of his life, and his children kept it after him. What endures is what you actually are. Everything else is just what you happen to be carrying.